He dead left evidence. That was the first thing Mara Voss had learned in 12 years of art restoration, not in any textbook, but in the quiet hours before a painting yielded its secrets. The dead left evidence in the craquelure of old varnish, in the ghost shapes beneath overpainting, in the pigments they had chosen with such care and intention. They left their fingerprints in the visible world long after their hands had gone cold. She was thinking about this on the night the restoration lab flooded. It was February in Amsterdam, and the Rijksmuseum's lower conservation wing had a pipe that had been threatening to burst since October. At 11:43 on a Tuesday, it finally committed. Mara was the only one there. She preferred the museum after hours, when the crowds had gone and she could work in silence with the old things, and she'd spent 40 minutes dragging paintings to higher ground before she noticed him standing in the doorway of the drying room. Not standing exactly, that was the wrong word. He was present in the doorway the way a held breath is present, occupying space without motion, without the small unconscious shifts a living body makes. He was tall, dark-haired, wearing clothes that were wrong for the weather. No coat. He was watching her move a 17th-century maritime scene to the top shelf, and his face held an expression she couldn't quite name. "You should be more careful with that one," he said. His Dutch was old-fashioned, textured with an accent she couldn't place. "The paint layer on the hull is barely adhered." Mara set the painting down and turned to face him fully. Her heart was doing something complicated. "How did you get in?" He glanced down at his hands as if the question surprised him. "I'm not entirely sure," he said, and then, with a kind of bewildered honesty that she would later think was the most dangerous thing about him, "That happens to me sometimes lately." His name was Elias. He told her this while she muppered water from the marble floor, and he crouched near the painting she'd just saved, examining the hull with the focused attention of someone who knew exactly what he was looking at. "You've restored this before," she said. "It wasn't a question." "No," he tilted his head, "but I know the artist, knew him." A pause. "He was careless with his sizing layer, we argued about it." Mara stopped mopping. The artist of that particular maritime scene had died in 1687. She looked at him, really looked, the way she looked at damaged paintings before she understood what she was seeing. His hands were steady. His breathing was slow, metered, as if each breath was slightly deliberate. His eyes, when they caught the overhead light, were a shade of brown so dark they absorbed rather than reflected. She had restored enough portraits to recognize when a face held something back, not deception, but depth, the particular density of someone who had survived many things. "I should call security," she said. "You should," he agreed. She didn't. "What remains?" She found him again 3 days later, in the gallery with the Rembrandt self-portraits. He was standing in front of the 1669 painting, the last one from the final year, looking at it with an expression that had no business being on a stranger's face in a public museum. It was the expression of someone reading a letter from an old friend, private, raw at the edges. "You're back," Mara said. "I keep ending up here." He said it quietly without turning. "I don't always have control over where I end up." She moved to stand beside him. The painting gazed out at them, that famous, exhausted dignity, the old man who had outlived his era and knew it. "What are you?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I used to know the answer to that before." He finally looked at her. Up close in daylight she could see that he was perhaps 35, perhaps 400. His face refused to be categorized. "I died, that much I know. But something went wrong in the process and I have been between ever since, for a very long time." Mara had grown up in a family of scientists. She believed in evidence, in documentation, in the painstaking discipline of proof. She also believed her own hands, and what they told her when they touched old canvas, that the past was not past, that everything that had ever been made was still, in some collapsed and concentrated form here. "Between," she repeated. Between, he looked back at the Rembrandt. Like this painting, not quite life and not quite elsewhere, preserved in a state that was never meant to be permanent. It was, she thought, the most precise thing anyone had ever said to her. She started meeting him deliberately after that. She told herself it was professional curiosity. He knew things about 17th century painting technique that no living scholar knew, intimate things, the kind of knowledge you get from being present in the studio. He described the smell of linseed oil cooking down, the way certain ground preparations cracked in cold storage, arguments between masters and apprentices over the proper thickness of glazing layers. She told herself it was professional curiosity until the evening, He asked her why she always ate alone. She was unwrapping a sandwich at the workbench, 2 hours after closing, and he had appeared in his usual way. She'd stopped being startled by it, sitting on the stool near the window as if he'd been there all along. "I'm not alone," she said. "You're here. Before me." She looked at her sandwich. I find other people's grief difficult to be around. Since my sister died, I find it." She stopped. She hadn't intended to say that. "I absorb it, I always have, hers especially because I was the one who was supposed to." She stopped again. "You don't have to finish that," Elias said. "I know," she looked up at him. "I prefer your company, you're not performing anything." Something moved across his face, something ancient and careful, and underneath both of those things grateful. "I don't know how to perform," he said. "I've been too far from the living for too long, I've forgotten how." "That," she said, "is not entirely a bad thing. The varnish beneath the varnish. The problem with caring for something you cannot keep is that the caring doesn't care about the impossibility." Mara had restored paintings with irreparable damage. She had worked on canvases where the best possible outcome was stabilization, not restoration, not return, but the prevention of further loss. She understood this work. She had never expected it to teach her anything about her own heart. She was documenting the maritime painting under raking light when she found the figure. Beneath the overpainting on the water's surface, visible only at a severe angle, only under controlled light, there was a second composition. Older, a man standing on a shore watching a ship. The painting she was restoring had been painted over him deliberately, covering him completely. Whoever he was, the original artist had decided to bury him under the sea. Elias appeared at her shoulder. He was quiet for a long time. "You know who this is," she said. "Yes. Tell me." He moved away from the painting toward the window. Outside, the canal was silver-black and still. The artist painted his brother. They had a quarrel, something small, as quarrels often are at the beginning before they become the shape of a life. The brother left on a ship. He never came back. The painting was a waiting. The artist waited years, and then he couldn't bear to look at the waiting anymore, so he painted the sea over the man and called it a maritime scene. He paused. "I was there." Mara sat very still. "You were there when?" "When he painted it over." His voice was entirely even. "I watched him do it. I had watched him do many things over many years by then, and I had not yet understood that watching was all I could do, that I could not intervene, could not tell him his brother had died of fever 6 months after leaving harbour, that there was no more waiting to do, that he could grieve properly and let the waiting go." His jaw tightened briefly. "I have spent a very long time watching people carry things they could have put down." "What stopped you from intervening?" He turned from the window. "What stops water from burning? It is simply not its nature. I can be present. I can sometimes be seen in certain places by certain people. I cannot change outcomes. I cannot carry anything from one side to the other." His eyes found hers. "Until recently." The word recently sat between them in the light. "Me," she said. "You see me," he said, and there was something in his voice that was not accusation and not wonder but was made of both. "You are the first person in 60 years who has seen me without being in the process of dying. I don't know what it means. I know what it has done to me." Mara set down her documentation tools. She had spent 12 years learning how to handle irreplaceable things, how to be careful, how to be precise, how to accept that some damage was permanent and some was not. She crossed the room to where he stood, and she put her hand against his face. He was warm. He was entirely, completely warm, and she felt the breath leave his body as though she had returned something to him that he'd forgotten was missing. "Mara, don't explain it," she said. "Don't give me the reasons it can't work. I already know all the reasons it can't work." "Then why?" "Because some of the most important things I've ever done," she said, "have been the preservation of things that were never meant to survive as long as they have." "What the between space knows." He told her his story in pieces, the way badly damaged paintings reveal themselves, not all at once, not in sequence, but in the order the damage decides. He had been a cartographer. He had died in 1743 on an expedition in the North Sea, which explained the museums, the water paintings, the way he always stood near windows facing the canal. He had died before he'd had a chance to. He used this phrase carefully, turning it over finish something important. He had been between for so long that the important thing had blurred at the edges. He knew it involved a person he had failed. He could not remember who. That is the cruelest part, he said. Not the loneliness, the forgetting what you're waiting to resolve. They were sitting on the floor of the storage room by then, which was undignified and completely natural. Mara had a cup of cold coffee. He had nothing, needed nothing, and she had stopped finding this strange. A cartographer, she said. I mapped coastlines. I was very good at it. A small, rueful smile. I believed that if you could describe the edges of a thing precisely enough, you understood the thing. It was a very rational way to approach the world, and it was entirely wrong about everything that mattered. What changed your mind? Dying, he said it simply. And then 300 years of being unable to leave the places I had been, watching the world revise itself without me, watching the coastlines I had mapped disappear under new cities. He looked at her. You cannot map the edge of a person, I know this now. The edge is not the point. The interior is the point. Mara thought about her sister, about the edges of her, the careful, public-facing competence, and how none of that had predicted the interior, the sudden hollowing out, the night Mara had found her at the bottom of a 4-day silence and had not understood in time what she was looking at. I didn't map my sister carefully enough, she said. You couldn't have stopped it, Elias said quietly. He said it with the weight of someone who had watched 300 years of humans not stopping things. The interior of another person is never fully knowable. You can be present, you can love them completely, you cannot always be in time. She had heard this before, from therapists, from grief counselors, from her mother, from friends. She had never believed it. She believed it now from him because he was someone who had been present for centuries and who was still here, still watching, still unable to stop things, and who had not been destroyed by that. Who had simply continued. How do you bear it, she asked, the watching? I used to ask myself the same question. He looked toward the window. Then I stopped asking. I started noticing instead the specific quality of late afternoon light in this city in November, the way certain paint colors only existed for 30 years before the formula was lost. Small things, exact things. He paused. You. The word arrived in the room like a stone dropped in still water. Me, she said. You are the most exact thing I have noticed in a very long time, he said, and it was possibly the least conventional declaration of feeling she had ever received, and it went through her like a current. The thing he had forgotten. She found the cartographer's journal by accident. She had been pulling a 19th-century landscape from deep storage to prepare it for a loan exhibition when she found the second box behind it, unlabeled, wooden, salt-stained in a way that suggested long-ago water damage. Inside, navigational instruments, a sextant with a broken arm, maps folded and refolded to illegibility at the creases. And at the bottom, under everything, a journal in a hand she had never seen before but recognized immediately, the way you recognize handwriting in a dream. She brought it to the lab. She did not call Elias. She sat with it for a long time first because she needed to read it alone before she could watch his face read it. It was not a navigational journal. It was a love letter in journal form, addressed to no one or to everyone or to whoever might eventually find it, addressed, she understood by the third page, to the person he had failed, a woman named Alida, a woman he had promised to return to. A woman who, the journal made clear in its cramped, increasingly desperate entries, had waited for him on the harbour at Rijksmuseum for 3 years after his ship went down, refusing to believe the reports, refusing to grieve, standing at the edge of the water and waiting for a man who was already between. Alida had finally left after 3 years. The journal, clearly written during the between time, clearly written in those first raw decades when he could occasionally move physical objects if he concentrated hard enough, recorded his anguish at watching her go. At being unable to tell her, I am here. I am not where you think I am, but I am here. And then in the final entry, she is gone. I cannot reach her now. I will wait until I can reach someone who can carry this to where she is, wherever she has ended up. I will wait as long as it takes. The entry was dated 1761, 18 years after his death. Mara sat for a long time in the silence of the lab. Then she looked up the museum's acquisition records for that storage box. It had been donated in 1923 by a family named de Vries, clearing out the estate of an elderly aunt. The aunt's name had been, Mara's throat tightened, Alida. Not the same Alida. 200 years separated them, but the same name, the same line. The journal had found its way to her family and stayed there across generations, passing from hand to hand to hand, until it ended up in a museum where a man who was between life and death had been spending his unending time. Mara understood now why he kept ending up here. She understood what the something important was. She understood what she was for, not in a diminishing way, not as a vessel for someone else's unfinished business, but in the way of a person who has found the thing that they are exactly suited to do. She called his name into the empty room. He arrived. The work of carrying. She showed him the journal without speaking. He did not move for a very long time. He stood over the table with his hands at his sides, and his breathing, the slow, deliberate breathing, simply stopped for a while. She watched his face do complicated things. The expression she had seen in front of the Rembrandt, private, raw at the edges, but deeper now, older, connected to something she had never had the language for. She kept it, he finally said. Her family kept it, for 200 years. He pressed his fingers to the cover of the journal without opening it. A cartographer's hands, she thought, made for the exact description of edges. I don't know how to do this, he said. What do you need to do? He looked up. Let her know that it was not a choice, that I did not leave willingly, that I was there the whole time she waited and I could not reach her. His jaw worked. I need her to know it wasn't, he stopped. His voice was not a ghost's voice in that moment. It was entirely a man's voice carrying a man's particular grief. I need her to know it wasn't abandonment. Mara thought about her sister, about the guilt she had carried for 5 years, the particular corrosive guilt of believing yourself to have been absent when presence was required, about the way it had made her careful of everything and close to no one, about how she had walked into this museum every night for years and filled the space with the dead and their evidence, because the dead at least stayed where she put them. I know what that kind of carrying feels like, she said, from the other side. I know you do. He looked at her with that ancient, careful, underneath everything grateful expression. I have thought about that, about what it means that you are the one who found it. What does it mean? I think, he said slowly, that the between space knows things that neither the living nor the dead know. I think it has been directing me toward you for reasons that are not only about the journal. He paused, though I am ashamed to say so, given that I am asking you to help me. Don't, she said. Don't apologize for the part where this is also about me. That's the part I believe in. He was very still. What can I do? She asked. Tell me what I can carry. The grave was in a churchyard in IJmuiden, 40 kilometers from Amsterdam, and Mara drove there on a Sunday morning in March when the light was flat, and the sea wind came in cold and direct from the water. She brought the journal. She brought a recording of her own voice reading the last entry aloud, made in the lab the night before while Elias listened from his stool by the window, and she could not see his face clearly enough to know what it cost him. The grave was small and very old, and said only ALIDA, 17211798, ZIJWACHTTE, which meant she waited. Mara sat in front of it for a long time. The sea was visible from the churchyard, a thin grey line between the dunes and the sky. She thought about waiting, about the weight of it, the way it accumulated over years, over decades, over a whole life that had been organized around an absence. She thought about the journal in her hands, written by a man still present in the world in the only way available to him, desperately trying to cross a distance he had not chosen. He was there, she told the grave, which was a strange thing to do but felt entirely right. He was there the whole time. He couldn't reach you, but he was there. He wants you to know that. He needs you to know that it wasn't he didn't leave, he was never able to leave. The sea wind moved through the churchyard grasses. Mara pressed her hand to the cold stone. I think you probably already knew, she said. I think people who wait for 3 years on a harbour know what they're waiting for, but he needed to say it. He's been carrying it for 300 years and I think it's time for him to put it down. She left the journal in the grass beside the grave, weighted by a stone from the path. She drove back to Amsterdam. She parked outside the museum and sat in the car for a moment with her hands on the wheel, and she allowed herself to feel the specific ache of carrying something for a very long time and finally setting it down, and she understood that she was not only thinking about Elias. What changes when you put something down? He was in the Maritime Gallery when she came back, standing in front of the painting, but different. She could see the difference immediately, the way she could see the difference in a painting after successful consolidation. The structure was the same. The surface was changed. Something shifted, he said without turning. About an hour ago I felt it. Good. He turned then. He looked at her with an expression so unguarded that she had to resist the impulse to document it, to reach for her camera, to record it, because expressions like that were the things that didn't survive in paintings. They existed only in the original, and they did not last. What does it mean? He asked. What happens now? She had thought about this. She had thought about it the whole drive back. I don't know, she said honestly. I think that's the question you've been waiting to answer. What do you want to happen now? He walked toward her. Not the sudden appearance, not the between space materializing, but walking across the gallery floor, past the maritime paintings and the winter landscapes and the portraits of people long dead, the ordinary human act of crossing a room toward someone. It seemed to cost him something and to give him something simultaneously. I want to stay, he said. I know that I might not be able to. I know that the reason I've been between for so long might have been this, the unresolved thing, and now that it's resolved I might, he stopped. I might not be in your world much longer. I know, Mara said. And you are still here. I'm still here. He was very close now. In the raking light of the gallery she could see all of him, the solidity of him, the warmth she had felt under her hand, the 300-year-old grief now settling into something that was not happiness exactly, but was its antechamber. I don't know how to be brief with things I care about, he said. I've had too much time, I believe in the long form. So do I, she said. I've spent 12 years on things other people wanted to rush. Then you understand, he said, that I mean to tell you something important and that I need you to hold it carefully because I'm not sure I'll have another opportunity. She held his gaze. Tell me. You are not someone I found on the way to something else, he said. You are not a means to a resolution. The first night before I knew anything about the journal, before any of this, the first night, you were moving a painting through flood water and talking to it, reassuring it, and I thought, there is a person who understands that the work of care is the same regardless of whether the thing you're caring for can hear you. That thought has not left me since. I want you to know that. Mara had spent 5 years since her sister's death building a life out of careful distances. She had gotten very good at it. She found now, with a clear and unclouded certainty, that she no longer wanted to be good at it. Stay, she said, as long as you can, stay. The nature of preservation. He did not disappear all at once. That was not how it worked, she would learn. The between space released him slowly over weeks, the way a painting releases its secrets, in layers, in increments, with long still periods where nothing seemed to change, and then sudden revelations where everything had. He became more consistently present, then always present. Then, one morning in April, he appeared in the lab in the ordinary way, through the door, which he now required, which he had not required before, and he was carrying coffee from the place on the Herengracht, and he had clearly been standing in a line to get it, and when she looked at him, he had the slightly overwhelmed expression of a man who had just successfully navigated a transaction with a barista after 3 centuries of intangibility. It was very loud in there, he said. The world is very loud. Yes, he set the coffee on her workbench. I find I don't mind it as much as I expected to. She looked at him across the workbench, across the painting she was currently restoring, a portrait of a woman who had died young, whose face was slowly being recovered from beneath 200 years of discoloured varnish. She had her brushes and her light and her careful hands, and she had this, a man standing in her lab in April light, slightly overwhelmed by coffee shops, looking at her like the world had just become unexpectedly worth navigating. There's a lot of administrative work involved in existing in this century, she warned him. Documents, numbers, forms. I was a cartographer, he said. I am not afraid of systems. You'll need a last name. I had one, I don't remember it. He considered this with equanimity. I should probably choose one that doesn't appear in the historical record. That's going to be a fascinating bureaucratic problem. I have had worse problems. He sat down on his stool, she had begun to think of it, the one by the window, and he wrapped his hands around his coffee cup with the specific, focused pleasure of someone relearning the texture of warmth. Tell me what you're working on today. So she told him. She told him about the woman in the portrait, what she knew and what she had found, and he listened the way he had always listened, with the full, unhurried attention of someone who understood that time was not something to be managed but something to be inhabited. She worked and he watched, and outside the canal was beginning to show the first pale green of spring along its edges, and the world went on in its ordinary, irreplaceable way, and neither of them felt the need to describe what they were to each other, because some things are better mapped by living them than by namming them from the outside. On the portrait, the woman's face continued to emerge from the varnish, bone by bone, light by light, restored to a visibility she had lost 200 years ago. Outside, Amsterdam moved through its April morning. Inside, two people who had each spent a long time carrying things alone sat together in the careful, exact quiet of work they both believed in. It was, Mara thought, precisely enough,